What the f? Hey, if you can't get off the stool, that's the end of the fight. You don't stand there for another minute. You're not fighting.
Let's go. If you're not cheating, you're not trying. It's an infamous saying in combat sports that many athletes have parroted over the years. There is no shortage of tales about questionable sportsmanship. While it was much easier for fighters to get away with cheating decades ago, new advancements in technology and rigorous testing have made it more difficult now. However, that hasn't stopped athletes from bending or outright breaking the rules. While the most common sin in combat sports is using illegal substances like steroids, we won't be focusing on that in this video. We have a whole video dedicated to roided cheaters. Instead, this video is for other kinds of alleged cheating that went unpunished. Come now, let's find some rule-bending fighters. Vitor Belfort. Vitor Belfort is a good fighter in his own right, but the same can hardly be said for his fighting history. In 2013, his victories over Dan Henderson, Michael Bisping, and Luke Rockhold were courtesy of a testosterone-fueled beatdown. Although in his defense, testosterone replacement therapy wasn't outlawed at the time. Also, not this video. Instead, we'll be focusing on his bout with Rich Franklin at UFC 103 in 2009. It was one of the biggest fights of his career since the Brazilian had been out of the Octagon for 4 years at the time. He was given the opportunity to return and jump into the title race for the middleweight championship. The fight was off to a weird start when it was revealed that the weight class was 195 pounds rather than the original 185 pounds. But that feels trivial compared to what was to come. The match was too close to call, given Belfort's time out of the Octagon and Franklin's form. However, it turned out to be a very one-sided in the end, with the Brazilian putting Franklin to sleep in the first round. While that sounds impressive, it's worth noting that Belfort only managed to exorcise Franklin's soul from his body with multiple illegal blows to the back of the head. Belfort first caught Franklin with the left cuff to the back of the head, but that wasn't illegal given that the latter had moved his head into position, which is why the referee Yves Levine let it slide. However, no one could believe their eyes when Belfort belted out 3 to 4 more clear shots to Franklin's head when the American was on all fours. Also, given that all 4 shots were accurately placed, it begs the question of whether the Brazilian had done it intentionally to ensure his victory. Given that several fighters have been penalized for such illegal moves in the past, for example Eric Silva, Vitor Belfort getting away without even a slap on the wrist was diabolical. Islam Makhachev. Dan Hooker was brought in on short notice to fight Islam Makhachev at UFC 267. He was Rafael dos Anjos' replacement after the Brazilian was ruled out due to an injury. The bout ended in a lopsided victory for Makhachev, who forced his opponent to tap out in the first round. Going into the fight, there was no ill will or beef between both fighters. However, that changed after the match. Islam Makhachev's next match involved Alexander Volkanovski, who could do nothing to stop the former from retaining his lightweight title at UFC 284. After this fight, Hooker took to X, previously known as Twitter, to make a rather damning allegation. He claimed that the Dagestani had hired a nurse to assist in the illegal usage of an IV for rehydration after going through a brutal weight cut. Hooker's accusations more or less branded Makhachev as a cheater. His final words were a challenge for anyone to prove him wrong. If that wasn't enough drama for Makhachev, the New Zealanders' head coach Eugene Behrman followed suit, sharing similar sentiments with his student. While it's very unusual for coaches to indulge in the rivalry of fighters they train, Behrman is hardly your average coach. In fact, it's par for the course for him to share his opinions on situations involving athletes who train at City Kickboxing. During an appearance on the MMA Hour show with Ariel Helwani, rather than dismiss Hooker's allegations, Behrman expressed suspicions that Makhachev may have bent the rules before the fight. Although he wasn't as overt in calling the Dagestani a cheater, he maintained that something had happened. Ali Abdelaziz, Islam's manager, didn't help the situation either, after deleting a tweet that could have potentially confirmed Islam's use of IV for rehydration. Andrei Arlovsky. Although critics of MMA see it as nothing but a barbaric blood sport, there are, in fact, rules to the game. Some actions in the Octagon could cause penalties. One such action is grabbing the fence. Of the many rules in the UFC, this is easily one of the most broken ones. It's even more infuriating that referees seldom penalize athletes for repeatedly fence grabbing and just give them a warning instead. However, that's not because referees are complicit. It's more because a fence grab is a defensive move used to counter a takedown, so fighters sort of do it instinctively. So as long as it's a defensive move that doesn't directly lead to the conclusion of the fight, it can be excused. That was not the case at UFC 66 when Andrei Arlovski fought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu phenom Marcio Cruz. The Brazilian was still a novice fighter at the time, so his first instinct was to take the fight to the ground, where he was more dominant. However, the takedown failed, and Cruz pivoted to pulling a half guard and then switching to a leg lock. How did Arlovski defend against this onslaught, you ask? With the kick to the face of Cruz, who was already on the floor. The referee Herb Dean had to step in for a timeout. In what proved to be a horrible move, Cruz begged the referee to let the fight resume from the same position. Again, his instincts were that going low gave him the upper hand. When the bell went off to resume the bout, the Brazilian's instinct proved horrible because he immediately received a right hook from Arlovski. That's when the fence grab entered the fray. The Belarusian wanted to keep Cruz from rolling into a knee bar, so he gripped the fence like a vice and began raining down blows to the Brazilian. Arlovski emerged as the winner eventually. Even though there were enough evidence for Cruz to appeal the loss, he just took his L and moved on. Priscila Cachoeira. Women's MMA isn't immune to cheating either. Priscila Cachoeira is easily one of the dirtiest fighters in the UFC currently, if not the dirtiest. Her fighting style involves clawing her way to victory, and I mean that quite literally. At UFC 291 in 2023, despite Cachoeira losing to Miranda Maverick via submission, there were loads of illegal moves in the fight that made fans irate with the Brazilian. Before the fight, Cachoeira already had a reputation after trying to feel out Jillian Robertson's eye sockets during their fight. Although Maverick held her own well to keep the Brazilian at bay, their fight was still an ugly affair. Cachoeira grabbed the fence and tried to fishhook and an oil check, but she seemed to get more frustrated the more she was out-grappled as the fight wore on. But that wasn't the first instance of the Brazilian fighting dirty, nor was it the second. In fact, you could argue that Cachoeira comes into every fight as if she has an issue with her opponents having exposed orifices. There's simply no professional sport in the world where sticking a finger into your colleague's eye sockets or other holes is accepted or celebrated. So why does it fly in MMA? Well, it doesn't. Cachoeira is just slick. The most noteworthy moments of a fight with Maverick came when Cachoeira dug her hand into the ladder's top and attempted to cause a wardrobe malfunction. Things got more suspect when the Brazilian attempted a butt drag defense and a high crotch takedown defense. Thankfully, Maverick reacted quickly and professionally against her ill-mannered opponent and ended the bout with a clean armbar that forced the Brazilian to tap out. Tim Elliott. Tim Elliott triumphed over Tagir Ulanbekov at UFC 272 via unanimous decision. However, once the match was over, the American was shocked to find allegations of cheating levied against him. These accusations came after Elliott was caught grabbing Ulanbekov's gloves several times during their bout. There was also something to be said about the 2 knee strikes that the American dealt his opponent, which could have been flagged as illegal. There was some merit to these allegations, considering the referee had warned Elliott about the glove grabbing part. The fact that the American did all of that and still won did not sit well with Ulanbekov's side, who felt they had been cheated out of a victory. Islam Makhachev even cornered Elliott after the match before taking to Instagram to fume about the Americans cheating. Makhachev highlighted 4 different incidents during the match in which he believed Elliott had fouled Ulanbekov and went as far as to calling him a dirty fighter. Khabib Nurmagomedov was another fighter in Ulanbekov's corner as he was shown on broadcast looking furious at how the bout was unfolding. Although Elliott admitted to grabbing his opponent's glove in a post-fight interview, he claimed that UFC President Dana White wasn't bothered about the alleged cheating, so he, Elliott, had no problem with the outcome. Yoel Romero. Yoel Romero was easily one of the most controversial fighters in the UFC. Several poignant moments defined his UFC career, like when he apparently shit himself literally during a fight with Derek Brunson, or the interview after his victory against Lyoto Machida, in which he suddenly started ranting about gay marriage. But of all his head-scratcher moments, none were more controversial than Stoolgate, his first fight with Tim Kennedy at UFC 178 in 2014. The first round was one-sided, with Romero taking the upper hand. However, by the second round, the pendulum started to swing in Kennedy's favor. In fact, the Army Ranger very nearly won in the round after dealing the Cuban a pair of uppercuts that switched the latter off. After the second uppercut, Romero crashed to the canvas, and unfortunately, this wasn't counted as a knockout because the buzzer went almost immediately. It wasn't basketball, there was no buzzer beater. Romero's corner carried him to his stool and attempted to reawaken him. However, even with 10 seconds left before the third round, Romero was still in La La Land. Kennedy's corner protested the delay, but referee Big John McCarthy stepped in and demanded that Romero's crew wipe some Vaseline off his body. The Cuban's cornermen took their sweet time doing this, snagging an extra 30 seconds of recovery time for their fighter. Although the rules strictly state that a bout ends as a TKO if a fighter is unable to answer the bell, the referee allowed the round to start late. Exactly 1 minute later, someone was asleep on the canvas, only it wasn't Romero. As you'd expect, this sparked an uproar from fans and Kennedy's corner, but the Nevada State Athletic Commission allowed the win to stand. Which one of these fights do you think is the worst form of uncaught cheating? Let us know in the comments and I'll catch you guys in the next video.